We're spending lots of money upgrading the wastewater treatment plants. It's kind of nice because you can manage nitrogen. You know, when you flush the toilet, you kind of stop thinking about it. But really what happens to it is that it goes into a pipe, that pipe goes into a bigger pipe, that pipe goes into a bigger pipe, and eventually it ends up at a wastewater treatment plant, and then it goes into Long Island Sound. So if you can clean up those wastewater treatment plants, and there's about 45 of them, then you can make a big difference, which is much easier than managing 3 million households, managing 45, businesses. But it costs a lot of money, and right now money is not easy to come by.
What exactly are they doing in the wastewater treatment?
That's a good question. They use a bacterial process called coupled nitrification-denitrification, and what that does is it takes the organic material that's in sewage, right? It breaks it down into inorganic nitrogen, nitrate, nitrite, and ammonium, and then other bacteria eat that, turn it into nitrogen gas that goes back up into the atmosphere and out of the system, right? Nitrogen is the most abundant gas on the planet. The atmosphere's almost 80% nitrogen. So it's not that we have a surplus of nitrogen around, it's that we have a surplus of that inorganic nitrogen. That's what plankton eat, right? Plankton, for the most part, there are a couple of exceptions to this rule, but plankton can't take nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into nutrient nitrogen. Nutrient nitrogen is nitrate, nitrite, and ammonia, the dissolved inorganic stuff. They only get that from other sources. So that's what we have to cut down. So that's what these bacteria do. The hardest thing about that is time, right? So you have to give the sewage water time for those bacteria to digest the nitrogen. And that means you have to have space to hold the water for a longer period of time. And space in New York City is not easy to come by. So, we're using technology to kind of increase the surface area that we can flow the water over, and they use big bubblers now to add more oxygen to help the bacteria break it down, and they're engineering better strains of bacteria that break it down faster. So we're making a lot of progress, but it's time consuming and it's expensive to do. We've spent a couple $1 billion so far, which is a lot of money, upgrading these wastewater treatment plants. And that's over the last maybe 5 years. And we don't see a real big impact on hypoxia yet. And that's complicated because part of the reason is it takes a while for it to work itself out of the system, right? Another part of the reason is that we've been putting sewage into Long Island Sound, similar to my research in Narragansett Bay, for a long, long time, right? People figured out how to poop a long time ago. And basically, since we figured out how to have running water, the first thing that was invented as soon as we figured out how to have running water was sewage. Because before that, you dug a hole and, went out to the hole, did your business, and now you have a big pile of poop in a hole in your backyard. And it's not really doesn't smell good, attracts a lot of flies. So as soon as we figured out to have running water, bam, that's where it's going. It's going into the sewers and out into Long Island Sound. That's about 1860s to 1880s, depending on where you are. So we've been doing this for a long time, and there's a huge accumulation of nitrogen in the sediments of Long Island Sound. So even though we're kind of turning off what's coming in down the rivers, some of that nitrogen from the sediments that's now been sitting there for a while is starting to come back up into the water, and we think it's going to take a while. Some of the European estuaries that have done this 10 or 15 years ago, they're now starting to see some impacts because over time the nitrogen has come out of the sediments, the systems kind of come into equilibrium, and now they're starting to see reduced hypoxia. So I think if I had to guess, I would say give it 5 or 10 years and we'll start to see some similar things going on.
Is there any way to sort of clean up the nitrogen that's in the sediments, or do you just kind of have to wait?
Not really. I mean, if you gave me an infinite budget, then yes, you could do it, but it's very, very hard, and there's bigger problems. It's better to be patient. And if you did clean that up, you'd kill everything that was living in those sediments, and you'd cause problems. You would expose all the mercury that's buried in those sediments. So I would say that's not a good idea. You could probably technically do it, but better to just give it some time and let it go. These hypoxia problems are not brand new. They're getting worse. But, waiting 5 or 10 years for them to get better is not gonna break the bank. It's just that if you guys who are the future, you need to understand that it's going to take some time, and you need to make sure your parents understand that it's going to take some time, because if you start getting a backlash and people start saying, look, we spent $2 billion, I don't see results, I want results now. It's not going to happen. You can buy a baseball team and all of a sudden bring together a bunch of superstars, put them on the field, and they have a decent chance of winning right now. Or you can do a good job in the draft and get your young players and develop them through your system. And the teams that win again and again are the teams that do the second. They get the young kids, they develop them, they teach them the way they want to play, and they bring them up because they're cheaper that way, right? So kind of have to think of it like baseball. I don't know if anybody in your group is a big baseball fan. But.
So is the expensive part of this process, is it the coupled nitrification, denitrification, or is the expensive part building places to store all this excess water?
I mean, the physical act of coupled nitrification, denitrification is done by bacteria, which in theory are free. In practice, it's finding a way to retain that water for a long enough time to let that go on. There's also some electricity associated with bubbling the water, and you have to add a little bit of carbon, a little bit of sugar for them to eat as well. They actually run out of sugar before they run out of nitrogen. So there's some physical expenses, but the big thing is the time. The 6 plants that treat New York City, I happen to know this statistic, but you have a similar issue in Connecticut, right? Those 6 plants discharge 1 billion gallons of water every day, right? So if you want to keep that water for 30 days to give that bacteria a chance to do its job, you have to be able to hold 30 billion gallons of water somewhere. That's a lot of water. That's like acres and acres of retention ponds. So, the land, purchasing the land to build the tanks, building the tanks to hold that water, and pumping 1 billion gallons of water a day around for 30 days, that's what the cost is. But in the grand scheme of things, hypoxia costs us a lot more than a couple of $1 billion a year in lost tourism revenue, in lost fisheries revenue, and in the fact that people who live in Long Island Sound don't get to enjoy Long Island Sound. So.
Sorry, you go.
Is upgrading the sewage treatment plants the main way that the EPA is planning on reaching their goal of 58% nitrogen levels by 2017?
It is the main way that they are planning on reaching it. It's not the only thing that we're doing. There's industrial permits. There's some work on agricultural fertilizer. There are some campaigns, like you see on the wall behind you, about citizen activity. There's some things that are being done with retention wetlands. So basically, right, just like with a sewage treatment plant, the longer you hold that water, the more time bacteria have to act on it. Right? So if you ever drive along the highway, right, and you see areas where they build a bridge, you'll see a little swamp along the side of the bridge. Is this ringing a bell, or have you guys never seen this?
I think I have.
Right? Keep an eye out for it the next time you go on any interstate highway. When there's an overpass, there'll be a little swamp along the side of the overpass. And what that swamp is designed to do is catch the water that's coming off the bridge and coming off all the pavement, because pavement is impervious, right? All that water drains down into that swamp, and the plants that are in that swamp use up the nitrogen, and then it drains into a storm sewer. All those swamps have a storm drain in the bottom of it. Probably don't need to pull over in the middle of a highway to really see it.
Is it right inside, like, the overpass, or is it along?
Yeah, it's usually inside the cloverleaf. So you'll see the exit goes around this way over the bridge, and there's a swamp right in the hole there.
Oh, I know.
Oh.
Yep. And there'll be like a drainage grate in the bottom of that, but the drainage grate comes up a little bit. So it intentionally lets a pool of water form, and cattails will grow in there, bacteria will grow in the bottom, they'll eat up some of that nitrogen before it goes into the storm drain. That's another way to do it that costs nothing, right? You don't have to do anything there, you just let plants grow. And it's dead space anyway.
Is it effective, or is it too
It-
little?
Well,